Okay, so what is the best diet for fatigue? Okay, so the way we receive information makes it feel like there are all these options and we have to choose one, right? And when we look at the data and literature, it makes it feel like this is better than that. But I can tell you, as an integrative doctor who's worked with a lot of patients, not everybody will stick to a ketogenic diet. And not everybody can stick to a Wall's protocol diet. And not everybody can stick to a vegan or vegetarian diet. So your job is to figure out what is the diet that's going to work for you. So for those of you that know me, you know what I'm about to say, right? Whole foods, plant-based diet. So the whole foods part means you're choosing foods that look like what they grew like in nature, right? So all of those things I can see like picking that off of a tree or out of the ground, right? It's not chopped up. It's not in a can. It doesn't have a nutrition label on it. And the second thing I'm always going to say is it's plant-based. At least 80% of your food that is coming in is plants. So here's an example. I would say this one is just 2 eggs and the rest of it is just plant-based foods like maybe tofu and a bunch of colorful vegetables. Just visually inspect your plate. What percent of the surface area is plants? That's it. So rather than having a big steak and 2 pieces of asparagus, hopefully it's a bunch of colorful vegetables with just like a little bit of steak. That's the right way to do it. And you get to choose what many of those foods are because we all have different upbringing, preferences, cultural influences. We have access to different foods, different budgets, different tastes. So I could not sit here and create a diet for each and every one of you. I'm going to challenge you to do that for yourself. And I hope you feel empowered because these are big principles to think about, right? So go look in your kitchen. How many things in your fridge are processed and how many things are whole foods? Look in your pantry and ask yourself the same thing. Hopefully when you open up your fridge, you see color, you see plants, and if that's not what your fridge looks like right now, you can get there. All right, so let me just start by talking about food sensitivities because we talk a lot about diets for this and that, but food sensitivities are quite problematic for people with MS and autoimmunity and even in fatigue. So if our gut health is not great, it's a setup for food sensitivities. It predisposes us. So maybe we took a bunch of antibiotics or we're just eating a bunch of processed foods. All of these things can damage the gut and cause what we call leaky gut or hyperpermeable gut. Basically, long story short, this revs up the immune system because the gut and the immune system sit right there together and they're looking to see about what's coming in. So if your gut is not working, it can lead to you developing food sensitivities. And if you continue to eat the foods that you are sensitive to, you're going to keep creating inflammation, both in your gut and in other parts of your body. Top 2 offenders, gluten and dairy. There's no question about this. Some of this has to do with the fact that these foods are so prevalent in our diets. We eat them all the time and you'll realize, and so your immune system has a lot of access to these foods. And then, gluten is a molecule it's a protein found in wheat, barley, and rye, and some other grains, but it's very immunogenic. So the immune system, for some reason, can recognize it really well and get confused and think that it's something to be attacked, so may produce antibodies against gluten. So anyways, all you just need to know is you may very likely to be sensitive to gluten and dairy. How do you deal with that? Well, you could go get blood testing. They're not terribly accurate. The gold standard is actually doing an elimination diet followed by a reintroduction. So ideally, if you just choose to do one food, cut out gluten, 3 to 6 weeks, you cut that food out, or maybe you choose to do multiple foods, up to you, depends on whatever you're up for. You remove those foods for 3 to 6 weeks, ideally 6 weeks. And then, and actually what you're looking for is, do you feel better? And sometimes people feel worse in the first 3 weeks before they feel better in weeks 4, 5, and 6 of the elimination. And then after that, you pick one food at a time that you've eliminated and you reintroduce it by itself heavily over 72 hours to see if a symptom comes up. This is the best way to decide if you do or do not have a food sensitivity. And if you come up with vague answers, you can always recheck it down the line to see if the same vague or the same vague symptom came up a second time. Okay, these are hard to do on your own. And I try to simplify it. I would love for people to do 10 foods at a time, because if you have one food sensitivity, you likely have others. So, and removing just one food out may not make you feel that much better, but I also want it to be simple. So if you're working on your own, pick just 1 or 2 foods to cut out for 3 to 6 weeks and then reintroduce it. But again, I've put a gut program together. So if you want to do this with support, I'd love for us to do it together, because it does require, some support. Now, if you're going to start cutting out a bunch of foods, like for example, you're going to cut out gluten, which means a lot of the carbs are going to come out of your diet. And let's say you are a person who doesn't have tightly controlled blood sugars. So you have low blood sugars or high blood sugars, or you're on medications for diabetes. Please work with your doctor, because if you are prone to unstable blood sugars and then you pull out all your carbs, your blood sugar can tank and you can actually die very quickly, actually. So we want you to be safe above all else. But working with a provider who can support you through this is really important. Okay, so let's go through a couple of diets. I put down Paleolithic diets. A lot of people go paleo. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of paleo. There's like the Atkins, type, where you get to eat sausage and bacon and steak, and it's all just so great. Some people, and you will probably lose some weight, but your cholesterol will probably go through the roof. Okay, and you'll probably get quite inflamed because you're consuming a lot of animal fat and a lot of toxins that come along with animal fat. A lot of toxins are fat soluble, so they sit in the fat of the animal. This is one of the reasons we want you to cut down the animal products. It's not just because of the nutrients, but also the toxic load. So this is actually Dr. Wall's paper where she compared a ketogenic diet and her modified paleo diet and looked at outcomes. So and let me just explain to you what a Paleolithic diet is. It's basically the food of our ancestors, our hunters-gatherers, because the foods that our ancestors ate actually has a lot to do with what our DNA is sort of set up to deal well with, right? And it's kind of a fascinating thing. We don't have to go into detail about it now, but anyways, the diet she's put together is eating lots and lots of sulfur-rich and leafy greens. It's many, many cups a day. You're flooding yourself with these really good healing molecules. You're eating meat and fish. These are allowed. Organ meats, if you can do them, and fermented foods to build up your microbiome. This is how we get the good bugs into the microbiome. Okay, and then you're cutting out grains and dairy. So her study, I think it was 36 weeks, and the people who did the modified paleo diet actually showed statistically significant improvement in fatigue. The ketogenic side, they did not show improvements in fatigue, but they did have lower insulin and blood sugar levels, which is actually really important too. This was not a huge study, but I think, I can't remember, I think maybe it was like 36 people, I could be wrong, but anyways, or maybe it was actually less than that. So, but it was not a giant study. And so this is one option. I think this is a wonderful diet because it is a whole foods, plant-based diet. She incorporates a lot of color, fermented foods, and avoids foods that aren't terribly nutritious and can be really problematic for those of us with MS, like grains and dairy, gluten and dairy. Okay. So, and I've linked the article down here for anybody who's interested, but this is a very useful tool and very, useful. Okay, so I want to talk to you about ketogenic diets. Even though in the last slide I said that in her study she wasn't able to demonstrate that ketogenic diets improved fatigue, there is actually data that it's an important tool for fatigue. Okay, so and let me just talk about what a ketogenic diet is. The point of doing it is that it actually can support and boost your mitochondria based on just what you're eating. And if you can fuel the mitochondria, you can produce more energy. And it's a low carb diet. It's a moderate protein diet. It's not high protein, it's moderate. And then it's high in plant-based fats. And that's sort of where the magic happens, because you're getting your body to shift from breaking down carbs for energy to breaking down fat for energy. And this results in weight loss, but it also results in ketone bodies. Okay, so, and ketone bodies are a super fuel for the brain. Your brain starts getting really well fueled, brain fog improves, fatigue, mood, anxiety, depression, pain, all of these things can improve. And so this is something I use a lot for my fatigue patients or chronic fatigue syndrome patients. And it's actually kind of a delicious diet because you get to eat a lot of plant-based fats like olive oil, olives, coconuts, avocados, and nuts and seeds, you know, if they're not super carby. So there was a study that put people with MS on a ketogenic diet for 6 months. Nobody had a bad outcome, so it was well tolerated. And when they did self-reported questionnaires, there was a 50% decrease in fatigue and depression. And there were lots of other things that improved as well. So like perceived disability and cognitive function. So I think this is another very reasonable diet. Again, it's a whole, as long as you're following it in a way that it's a whole foods and plant-based diet that's full of color and lots of fermented foods. And by lots, I mean like a tablespoon or two a day of a fermented food. You know, you kind of start pairing these with your meals and you kind of get used to it and you might actually really crave it after a while. My kids love fermented foods. It's a taste you can acquire. Again, this is another diet. If you have any blood sugar issues, whether it's high or low or unstable blood sugars, or you're on diabetes medications, please work with your practitioners to make sure you don't bottom out your blood sugars when you pull those carbs out, right? Let's make sure we like live through this and see the benefits, okay?